So in today's video, we are going to be grading the Chiefs 2022 offseason. Now, before we get into the video, please consider liking and subscribing, and let's jump right into the video. So I've already made videos discussing their free agency and gave their free agency a grade, and I've also given their draft a grade for this year. But I wanted to take all that information and just put all of that into one video and give their entire offseason as a whole one big grade, because while I think each individual aspect of the offseason, the Chiefs did a great job and hit home runs and everything they did, there is one aspect of this team that I did bump down the letter grade just a tad bit because of the hole that is still left on one particular part of the team. But we will get to that part of the team in just 1 second. But first, let's look at some of the departures, the key departures that happened this offseason. Obviously, Tyreek Hill traded to the Miami Dolphins, Tyrann Mathieu signed with the Saints, Charvarius Ward signed with the 49ers, and Melvin Ingram signed with the Miami Dolphins. I think each of those guys going to other teams is definitely going to have an impact on the Chiefs at some point in the season, mainly early on, but those are some key departures that it may take a minute for the Chiefs to gel a little bit with those guys being gone. But overall, I think with those losses, I still think the Chiefs are going to be just fine, because let's look at some of the additions. Now, I'm not going to read all the additions, but here's some of the biggest additions this offseason. They signed Juju Smith-Schuster, signed MVS, Justin Reed, Ronald Jones, Jermaine Carter, Taylor Stallworth, Skyy Moore, Trent McDuffie, George Karlaftis, Brian Cook, Leo Chanel, Darian Kennard, Isaiah Pacheco, and Justin Ross. Those are some of the key additions, some of the biggest additions. There was obviously much more, but those are just some of the biggest additions the Chiefs had. Let's look at the offensive side of the ball. Now, obviously, we mentioned Tyreek Hill. He was traded to the Miami Dolphins, so that's obviously going to be a big loss for the Chiefs offense. There's really no sugarcoating it. What Tyreek Hill brought to the offense was massive, and what his skill set on the offense is literally irreplaceable. I don't think anything that any of the receivers on the team does this next year is going to be able to replace the kind of play that Tyreek Hill brought to the football field. His speed, his athletic ability, just everything Tyreek Hill did. You're not going to be able to replace that with literally any other receiver. However, with this offense, I still think that the offense is just fine. I think this offense actually has potential to be a little bit better than it was last year, because if you remember, they struggled with the too high looks from defenses for the middle part of the season. And with this offense, and there's really no game-breaking speed other than MVS, then the Chiefs really have more options, I think, that are going to be available for them. Now, teams may still play their too high look, but I just think with the structure of this offense right now, that the Chiefs are going to be able to pick apart that too high look even better than they did last year, because last year it really did just feel like it was Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill. Now, obviously, I'm never going to bash Tyreek Hill. It sucks that he's gone, but I just think there's more options available now that Tyreek Hill is gone and the receiving core that they have. Obviously, with Juju, he's a very good physical receiver, well-rounded receiver. It's a guy that can do almost anything that you need on the football field. And Tyreek Hill is kind of a receiver that the Chiefs really haven't had in the time that Patrick Mahomes has been the quarterback. So I think Juju is going to fit this offense in a way that we haven't really had a receiver like that before. Juju, you know, he's a special talent. He's a good talent. He was good in Pittsburgh. Don't let his numbers scare you, because Big Ben was on his last legs of his career when he was in Pittsburgh. So his numbers weren't the most flashy numbers in the world, but I still think Juju has plenty enough talent. He was a good receiver in Pittsburgh, and his numbers were just down a little bit because Matt Canada's offense isn't particularly good, in my opinion, some of the plays they ran. And then also Big Ben was in the late stages of his career. And then we have MVS, he's a speed receiver. I don't think he's going to have the game-breaking speed like Tyreek Hill did, but I still think his speed and his big play ability is going to fit the Chiefs offense perfectly. He's a guy that averaged 17.5 yards per reception for his career, so his main goal as a receiver when he was in Green Bay was a big play receiver. And so I think he's going to fit the Chiefs offense perfectly, and I think he's going to bring that to the football field. He's going to fit right in, and I don't think that Patrick Mahomes and MVS are really going to miss a beat, just because what Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes like to do, MVS brings that directly to the team right away. So that gelling process, I don't know if that's really going to be a big issue. So overall, the big two free agent signing wide receivers, I'm a huge fan of. If we're looking at who's on the team, McCole Hardman, he's entering his 4th year, and he's gotten better every single year. So I really like the potential for McCole Hardman this year, just because he's a guy that knows the system the most. So McCole Hardman's going to have a really good chance to shine this year, but he's also going into a contract year. So that's something to look forward to with McCole Hardman. If we're looking at the draft, they drafted Skyy Moore, who in my opinion is just going to be another well-rounded receiver. He may not be the fastest guy in the field. He's just a good receiver. His ability to get off the line of scrimmage, run his routes, get himself open is, again, another type of receiver that we really haven't had on the Chiefs offense because it's mainly been speed guys. And while I think MVS has the speed that the Chiefs want to have on their offense, you have guys like Juju, Skyy Moore, who have unbelievable wide receiver assets and skills. Not saying that MVS doesn't, but those are just something that the Chiefs really haven't had in their offense. So they have two well-rounded receivers with Juju, Skyy Moore. They have the speed with MVS and Hardman. And then we have Justin Ross, who could become an underrated undrafted free agent signing in the future, because if we look what he did his freshman year at Clemson, he was on track probably to be one of the top receivers drafted this year had he not gotten hurt. So the Chiefs may have just gotten an absolute steal when it came to the undrafted free agent. And then you have that final roster spot, the final wide receiver spot that could be filled, and Josh Gordon could probably take that spot. But overall, the Chiefs' wide receiving core is great. The offensive line is unbelievable. The offensive line that Brett Veach rebuilt in one offseason is an unbelievable offensive line. Now, they have to take advantage of that because that's what kind of killed them in the AFC Championship game. Their refusal to use it in parts of that game. They should have ran the ball more, but they have great running backs. They have Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who I know some people get frustrated with him. I think he's a good running back, and I think this is the year, especially with the transition of the type of offense they're going to be running, especially in the passing game, for Clyde to really show his skills. They just added Ronald Jones, who was really good in Tampa Bay, Isaiah Pacheco, who could be getting more snaps than just being a third down back, and then Derek Gore, who had really good moments last year. So offensively, the Chiefs are loaded. They still have Travis Kelce, the best tight end in football, and they still have Patrick Mahomes, who I think is still the best quarterback in the NFL. So offensively, Chiefs are fine. So the offense, it still gets an A. It's the defensive side of the ball that has me a little bit worried still. Now, secondary-wise, I think the secondary is just fine. I honestly was a fan of the secondary before the draft, but I think Brett Veach absolutely nailed the draft. You had L'Jarius Sneed, who was on the team still. They brought in Justin Reed. They drafted Brian Cook. They drafted Trent McDuffie. Thornhill was still on the team, and then Rashad Fenton. So the secondary is a really solid group. The linebacking core is great with Willie Gay, Nick Bolton, Jermaine Carter, and they drafted Leo Chanel. So those two levels of the defense are going to be fine. I don't think those two levels of the defense are really going to be the problem. I think our secondary has the ability, with especially L'Jarius Sneed and Trent McDuffie, who I'm a fan of L'Jarius Sneed. He's been an absolute playmaker for that defense. He's one of the most electrifying defensive players in the NFL. So he's really fun to watch play football. You have Trent McDuffie. If his skills translate to the NFL, we're going to have that lockdown corner that we desperately need. Justin Reed was a really good player in Houston. Brian Cook was just a hard-hitting safety. And then Thornhill, he did struggle at times, but, him and Justin Reed and Brian Cook should be a nice trio of safeties there. So, and then the linebacking core, adding Leo Chanel to that defense, along with Nick Bolton and Willie Gay, those guys are going to be a hard-hitting group. Like, this entire defense is going to be a group of hard-hitting guys. So I really like what the defense has. The one issue is, I think, the defensive line, because the defensive line, I think, is still the biggest issue with the Chiefs right now. And that's why the Melvin Ingram going to the Dolphins, I think, is going to be the biggest loss, I think, to the Chiefs this entire season. And I know it's one tiny little thing, and Melvin Ingram didn't play that much, but when Melvin Ingram did play for Kansas City last year, his impact was felt on the field. You knew when Ingram was in the game, he was about to make an impact on the game. And with him gone, I think the defensive line is going to take a massive hit. While I think Tyreek Hill offensively, it's going to take, a little bit to get adjusted with the new receivers. Tyrann Mathieu, he has skills that a lot of other safeties just don't have. Charvarius Ward, he was a good player. I still, the losses are going to be felt with those three guys, I'm sure, at some point. But Melvin Ingram, I think, has potential to be the biggest loss, because the defensive line, I think, still has a little bit of issues. Now, George Karlaftis, I think, has unbelievable potential. I think he's going to be good, especially because the Chiefs were so high on him this year in the draft. So I think that they're going to put him in the right position to succeed, to help out Chris Jones, to help out Derek Nottie, to help out Frank Clark. And I really do think that the defensive line is solid. They added Taylor Stallworth. So the defensive line is a very solid group, but it's the edge rusher that's still going to be a bit, because Mike Dana, I really like him. His production isn't necessarily the highest of anybody. He still has a lot of room to improve. He's a good player, but he still has a lot of room to improve. Him and Frank Clark, Mike Dana seemed like he was playing better than Frank Clark at times last year. Frank Clark was just MIA at points. But I do think that the defensive line, again, still needs help. Guys like Joshua Kando, who was drafted, didn't really play. He was injured most of last season. So there's just a lot of question marks when it comes to this defensive line right now. that I have to bump down the offseason grade to an A-. So I give the offensive side of the ball, it's still an A. I like what the offensive side of the ball is. I like everything that they've done on defense, but the defensive side of the ball, especially the defensive line, I think is still the issue, especially on the edge. The inside of the defensive line, I think, is fine. Chris Jones is still going to wreck people, but relying on a rookie and George Karlaftis to be the biggest difference maker for this Chiefs defensive line, I think is a bit of a tall task. And so it's going to be a season where guys like Mike Dana, like I said, he's going to have to elevate his game. And then Frank Clark, he's definitely going to have a better season because he had his worst season as a pro other than his rookie year last year. So it's a bit of a rough spot, I still think, on the team. Now, Karlaftis, great addition. I think it's going to make the defensive line better than what it was last year. I'm not going to downplay that Karlaftis has potential to make this defensive line a lot better than it was, but I still think it's the biggest hole that the Chiefs have on their team right now, and it would be the biggest thing that the Chiefs would have to address. So overall, I give the Chiefs offseason an A- because they addressed the wide receiving position, they addressed the secondary, they added to the linebacking core. The offensive line is really good now that they added Darian Kennard, who's potentially going to be a starter at some point. So everything around the team they addressed. They at least addressed everything. Even the defensive line, which I still think needs to get a little bit better. They addressed everything, but they still need a bit of help on the edge. So with all that, I give the Chiefs offseason as a whole an A-. But those are my thoughts on the Chiefs offseason. That is my Chiefs offseason grade. Give me your grade down below. What would you give it? An A, A-, B, B-? What would you give it? Give me your thoughts down below, and I'll see you in the next one.